it talks.
Yes, that's the first time I've heard it talk.
That's the first time I've heard it talk. It talks to us now.
Ah.
Welcome, everyone. I'm Britin Bostic, and we will get started with our Tuesday Talks with Britin and Ann here very shortly. We're going to go live on the city's Facebook page. So if you're watching from Facebook, thanks so much for joining us. You're able to share our program through social media if you'd like. But if you want to watch live on the Zoom webinar, you can go to historic.georgetown.org and click on the link to join us directly. So either way will work for us. Either way, we're excited to have you all joining us. We'll just get started in a couple of minutes. We are doing a very special Preservation Month series where we're doing Tuesday Talks every single Tuesday in May. And so this is our last special series for the month. It's a good one. It has probably the most photos of any of our presentations so far. It has a couple of really funny stories that we're excited to share. Not that we're not ever excited to share stories, but these are pretty fun. And we have some great updates from our last presentation and some interesting information that our listeners shared with us. So we have some really exciting and fun news and also some great updates to share about how we are extending Preservation Month celebrations into June because we just didn't have enough time in May to do it all. So it's going to be a really fun show. Hope you can join us. Hope you share this with anybody who might be interested. These programs are saved. They're recorded and posted on our website. If you go to historic.georgetown.org, you can scroll down a little bit to the Tuesday Talks graphic, and you can see links to all of our videos from this month. And then it'll also take you to our page where we host all of the previously recorded videos. We've been doing this for a year now. We started this as a virtual celebration of Preservation Month last year and turned out to be so much fun and kind of a hit. And so we've continued to do it and have gotten over 1,000 views of our Tuesday Talks program in the last year. So we really appreciate that. Thank you all so much for your support ongoing, which is really great. All right, so Ann, it is noon o'clock and we'll get started. We're going to start today with kind of a special video that is provided by one of our building owners that we're talking about today. So I just talked a minute ago, if you're just joining us, I'm Britin Bostic. I'm the Downtown and Historic Planner for the City of Georgetown. Joining me is Ann Evans, our super excellent reference librarian at the award-winning Georgetown Public Library. Ann has all of the local knowledge and I have a lot of maps, and together they make for a pretty interesting presentation. But we have some really great downtown partners that we've worked with over the last month as we've done our presentations. We had a video from the rooftop of the Williamson County Courthouse brought to you by our county judge, Judge Gravel. And then we had City Post offer an in-person opportunity to see photos and talk to them about the remodel of the historic post office building, which is now going to be a restaurant and event space. And then we also have from Century 21 an invitation to a birthday party celebration that they'll be doing for First Friday. So here is that video.
Hey Georgetown, I'm Wendy Cash, the sales manager here at Century 21 Hellman Stribling, located on the most beautiful town square in Texas. Here, the real estate party is always on, where our agents provide exceptional experiences to clients every day. But I'm here today to invite you to a birthday party. That's right, our building, the Dimmit Building, is turning 120 years old this year. So we thought, what better way to celebrate than to throw a birthday party? So we're inviting you to join us on Friday, June 4th from 4:30 to 6:30. We're gonna have cupcakes, ice cream, that's right, our own signature flavor of ice cream, Century 21 Home Sweet Home from Scoops, All Things Kids, and we might have an adult beverage or two. So join us Friday, June 4th from 4:30 to 6:30. Happy birthday, Dimmit Building.
Thanks so much for that, Wendy. And so you are invited to a building birthday party June 4th at 4:30 at the Century 21 office. So that's in the Dimmit Building, the PH Dimmit Building,
The
not to be
PH
confused
Dimmit.
with the other Dimmit Building. It's on the corner of 8th and Main Streets, right on the southeast corner of our courthouse square downtown. So
To be fair,
that's-
both Dimmit buildings are at that corner. So if you're in the
I'm not
wrong
making
one,
it
just
better.
go to the other one.
I'm not making it better, am I? All right, so to our regularly scheduled PowerPoint presentation. This is the close of Preservation Month in terms of it being May. It's not the close of Preservation Month in terms of our celebration. So we are tiptoeing right on into June with Preservation Month. So first up, next Tuesday, we'll be doing our regularly scheduled Tuesday talks. It will be Tuesday, June 1st. And so from noon to 1 p.m. Anna and I will be covering all of the stories that we didn't have time for this month. So it's kind of a roundup. We're gonna loosely call it hidden histories because there are things that might not be very evident today, but we have great records of, or we've got great kind of documentation of. Some of this comes from newspaper articles, some of it comes from photographs, some of it comes from stories that people have told us. And so one of the great examples of stories that people tell us is over the last couple of weeks, we've had people contact us through our email and through the phone and share information that we did not know that is a part of the stories that we've been telling. And so for the post office in particular, we had one of our viewers call and let us know that she had understood that TJ and Cora Caswell, who constructed a house very close to the downtown. It's a beautiful historic structure constructed around the turn of the 20th century. Her understanding of what she'd been told is that TJ and Cora Caswell had given the land for the post office when it was constructed. And she asked if I could confirm that. And so I looked through deed records, trying to understand the history of the property ownership further back than I had previously gone. And it turns out that yes, TJ and Cora Caswell did provide the land that the post office went on, but they didn't give it away. They sold it for $5,000 to the United States of America. And so what's so fun is in this public record that is filed with the Williamson County Clerk. They make a lot of their records searchable online, so it makes it pretty easy to find if you know how to look through public documents for history research purposes, which is a great fun part of my job and part of Ann's work. Mm-hmm. We were able to see a copy of this deed where the Caswells sold the east half of the block. So not just where the old post office is, but the entire piece of property right behind it, that whole half of the block, the Caswells had owned, and they sold it to the United States of America. That's how it's written on the document, for $5,000 in 1914. So between 1914 and 1931, the United States of America owned that property, but it took them that long to get the post office building project developed, designed, planned out, the construction bids, et cetera. What I thought was so funny is that the sale was to the United States of America and not to the US Postal Service or to the United States Postmaster General or something more specific. And so sometimes what you find in old deed records is really quite fun. We had another person contact us via email. And so this person is in the family of Aaron Williams. And we had shared about Aaron Williams being the owner of one of the oldest structures in our downtown still in existence, that 213 West 8th Street. And so it turns out we're still looking into it, but there were maybe at least a couple of Aaron Williams who were kind of in the wagon trade and trying to understand family relationships. And it looks like there may have been as many as 3 Aaron Williams in Georgetown about the same time period. And so that's led to some really interesting conversations, looking a little bit more into history. I found a newspaper clipping that was an advertisement from an Aaron Williams who was a blacksmith, but he wasn't advertising a location on the square. He was advertising blacksmithing services from his homestead. And so one of the funny things about old newspapers is they often didn't provide an address, or the location might be very general. And if you think, well, how did anybody find anything? At the time, Georgetown had just a couple hundred people and then a few hundred people. And so it would have been a lot easier to know where everything and everyone was. But sometimes not having those addresses makes it difficult for Ann and I to figure out where people were. So that person who was very generous in contacting us had shared some other information about the barber shop and other things like that. That was really fun to know. So if y'all do have additional histories you want to share with us, please feel free to do that. We love to know more. We love to know things that we didn't know before, or discover that things were not quite what we thought that they were. So we're going to do kind of an extended version of Preservation Month next Tuesday at noon. And then on June 3rd at 8:30 a.m., Breakfast Bites is back in person at the Georgetown Public Library. So if you're not familiar with the Breakfast Bites program, this is put on by our Main Street Advisory Board. They do a downtown lowdown, so you can get up to speed on what's going on in the downtown. They have a speaker. I get to be the speaker for June. I'm so honored to be able to do that. That's always a fun time. So I will also be doing a Hidden Histories presentation for that, but it'll be a different presentation than what Ann and I are doing. So don't feel like you're going to get the same content. We're going to share as much as we can into this next week. And so if you're interested in participating or joining that program, space is limited in person, so you do need to RSVP. You can go to mainstreet.georgetown.org and get signed up for that. I believe there's going to be a virtual option available too. So stay tuned for that. And then one of our really important preservation partners, Preservation Georgetown, is going to host a workshop for their annual grant. So if you are an owner of property in our historic districts, you have the opportunity to request grant monies for a preservation project that you might be doing. And so these are for projects specifically geared toward preserving a structure. So not necessarily for new additions or kind of for just a new paint touch up. These are for preservation projects, but they'll give you a lot more information about that in this workshop. So that's on Saturday, June 5th. And so I've got a flyer up sharing information about that. You can email preservationgeorgetown@gmail.com for more information, or you can call 512-869-8597 and get more info about that session. So that'll be a really great time if you're a historic property owner, if you own property in our historic districts, that'd be a great time to check out what their grant program offers and what the requirements are to apply. And so if that's not enough for you, the Williamson Museum's IOOF cemetery tour did get postponed because of the rain that we've had. They are working on getting that rescheduled. And so keep up with the Williamson Museum social media or with their website to learn when the rescheduled date will be. So if you didn't get to go, don't worry, you haven't missed it yet. They're going to reschedule and give everybody an opportunity to do that on a less rainy day, which will be really great. And then again, for June 4th, which is a Friday, if you want to check out Century 21's building birthday party with cupcakes and ice cream, please do that starting at 4:30. So a lot of announcements. We'll get into our content for today. This is a building that I really love, and I love all the more because this is a building that is much older than it appears. There is a date stamped on the building, but that is not where it started. So, and what we're showing in this slide is a different building than the one that's currently sitting on the corner of 7th and Austin Avenue. Why is that?
It is. So what we know today as the Locket Building was, of course, MB Locket, who we'll talk about later, Melville. He did the facade and everything like that. But the land and how it changed hands actually goes back to really the beginning of Georgetown. And so around 1849, we have accounts that Andrew Jackson McKay, who was one of our first postmasters in Georgetown, if you remember, he's the one that would take the mail around in his hat, is actually operating his dry goods store here at this corner. It probably wasn't this building. This is probably a later building. By about the 1860s, we have accounts that Josiah Taylor is operating a dry goods store here. He is MZ Taylor's dad. MZ is the one who, when he was 6 years old, would sleep on the counter there in the dry goods store with his shotgun to make sure no one came in at night and stole anything. So he actually operates there for a little while, then it changes hands several times before it ends up with MB Locket, eventually operating his store and changing kind of the facade into what we know it today. But you can see it was a brick building. It was a grocery dry goods store for most of its life, really. My favorite picture of it, though, is perhaps that one where you can see the Montgomery advertisement on the edge of the building. That would have been on the Austin Avenue side. And then down in the picture on the right is actually a traveling medicine show taking place outside the Locket Building. If you blew that up, it actually says Cuban medicine. I don't know exactly what that means or where they were from, where they were going. I would love to know more about this special elixir that they were selling, but that was pretty common at the time in the late 1800s to have those traveling medicine men selling their own concoctions. So we know this building that we're seeing here is pre-1890s.
And this is a building that MB Locket paid a lot of money for. And so what we've got at the very bottom, if you can read really old cursive, you're really well situated to do historic research. So for everybody who's having a little bit of trouble, and it's a bit faint, but he paid $2,750 basically in cash. And then he also assumed a $4,000 debt on this building. So the time period, this is around 1881 that Lockett's, it looks like, or a little bit after 1881 that Lockett's acquiring the property. But what was really standing out to me is last week we talked about the Milan Building, and it cost about $5,000 for that building, which was very beautiful. It was that cast iron storefront that came from the Mesker brothers, and so it had to be brought in on the train. It was very expensive. This is another one of the most expensive transactions I've seen for this time period in the downtown. So MB Locket was pretty well off, it seems. And was this a wealthy family? Because based on what I just read, it seems like they had a lot of cash on hand.
Yes, they did. They were a wealthy family. He actually grew up the son of a minister in Arkansas. They made their way here. He went to college, which is pretty unusual. He went to McKenzie College in East Texas. And he attempted to be a school teacher for a short period of time before he actually made the change into being a merchant and mercantile, where he seems to have made more of his wealth. He did eventually, he actually had 5 daughters, and part of his reason for moving to Georgetown was because Southwestern University was here, as well as what was then the Georgetown Preparatory Academy. And he actually really wanted his daughters to receive an education, and that was his motivation in coming to Georgetown instead of staying out. He was actually in Bertram at the time.
Okay.
And so he came back this way, and you actually see that throughout his entire life, as he is a trustee and lifelong supporter of Southwestern University, as well as many different things. He was well off. He seems to have prospered in his mercantile business, very much so much so that he actually at one point in time lent money to Dan Brown of what would become Brown and Root, which is the enormous construction firm out of Houston. They actually started in Taylor, and some of their first contracts were in the 1920s, right after the floods. And so he's one of the early lenders of and financial supporters of that company.
That's incredible. Definitely not what I would have expected. The other thing is he seems to have provided really well for his children. You talked about him really wanting them to be well educated. they weren't just well educated, they're married names. So we have in this affidavit that shares that the Locket family owned that building for a long time. He didn't just build it and then sell it and move on. This is something that was in the family for a few decades, it looks like. And his daughter's married last names read like a who's who of Georgetown. And so we have a Vaden, we have a Pugh, we have a Love, we have, names, a Nichols, names that we kind of are very familiar with, names that are associated not only with Southwestern, but with other really successful families, names that are associated in some cases with very beautiful Belford homes. If you joined us for our tour of Belford homes in April, some of those names are part of that tour. So really a well-connected family, and it looks like he had a hand not only in local business, but he was financing or being a financial backer for businesses that were starting and then have grown into very large corporations today, 100 years later.
Yes, absolutely.
And from what I can tell, he was, so I think he passed sometime around 1930, but I think was doing business like right up until his death. And so, yeah, like buying and selling a lot of land over time. And so this is the building. If we go to the maps, this is the building there on the northeast corner of 7th and Austin Avenue. 7th Street used to be San Gabriel and Austin Avenue used to be Brushy. So the street names that you see on the maps don't necessarily match up to the street names that we have today. That's always a fun part of looking at these maps. The street names changed around 1915, 1916. That's when we start to see things roll over. But this is a really beautiful brick building. It has been restored. We'll get into that. But it started out just like the picture that you showed in 1885. This was a stone building. Part of it was 2 stories. The back part was a single story, had a wood canopy out front. It's showing a 2-story, so kind of that balcony that was out front. And it stayed that way through 1889. So other than a little bit being built onto the back, it looks like it's pretty much the same building. These are a little blurry, so I apologize for that when we zoomed in. But in 1894, we're still seeing the same building that you saw in those photos. But by the time we get to 1900, and the building is dated 1896 with the Locket name on it. So celebrating its 125th birthday today. Happy birthday, Locket Building. This is when the Lockets decided to invest a lot of money into the facade of their building to use that cast iron storefront that we talked about and create this lightness and this elegance and be able to do these really large windows. And they also put a lot of ornamentation on the building front. So we see this building transition from a rougher stone building with this 2-story front balcony to a really elegant 2-story building with a brick facade. There's a red line marked across the blue building. That means it's a stone building with a brick facade. And then that 2-story balcony goes to a 1-story canopy. And then there's, it says a well hole. It's kind of drawn in a rectangle in the middle. What would a well hole in the middle of a building been? Do we have any idea?
Basically that.
Do they have a well in the very middle of their building?
A well in the middle of their building. You can actually kind of see that at Barrels and Amps today. A well in the middle of the building. A lot of times you find it in places that were liveries.
Okay.
Or some sort of stable at one point in time. So it would have been a place for fresh water for you to go to water your horses and things like that.
Just go straight to the middle of the store and draw up a bucket.
Middle of the store.
That's wild. Well, we went from kind of a rougher store with a well hole in the middle of the floor to a dry goods, clothing, and other kind of a little bit more refined offerings. And so by 1905, we see that the front canopy has changed. It's now extending out across the corner. And then in 1910, we see they've added the detail of the cast iron staircases, not only on the inside of the building, but also on the outside. So that cast iron staircase that you see on the outside of the building today, that's been there for over 100 years. And that was how you got up to the 2nd floor, either as a tenant space, possibly as a living space. So it could have been an office. People could live above buildings in the downtown back in the day. That that wouldn't have necessarily been very popular in Georgetown. It probably would have been more likely to be a business. So we had dentist offices on the second floors. We had lawyers' offices. The courthouse is just right there across the street.
A lot
that
of
would have been
lodges and
convenient.
orders as well.
All kinds of things. And then you just would have had all kinds of professional services that would have gone on a second floor, very similar to what we do today. So it's kind of fun sometimes to see how things change and then how they don't. They do note on this 1910 map that there is a very decorative window in the corner, and they begin to draw that out. Not very successfully, but they drew it out. And then by 1916, this building was vacant. And it appears that they didn't have a tenant in there at the time. And do we know anything about why the building would have been listed as vacant? Because none of the photographs that I've seen give us a good indication of why.
I really don't, actually. From what I've seen, it's just kind of the ebb and flow of the square itself, just like today.
So by 1925, the map in the middle, that's the point in time where we start to lose a lot of the descriptions of businesses in the Sanborn maps. But the building really hasn't substantially changed by 1925 or by 1940, according to the drawing. So still had a balcony on kind of the interior of the building, and then had this big canopy out front, which now we get to start showing the photos of. So the photo on the left, we see a whole crowd of people on the square. This is just before automobiles are coming in. You can see some horse-drawn carriages, but a lot of people appear to be riding horses. And does this look like a First Monday day?
It looks like it could be a First Monday, yes. Because it looks like most of what you see are men. There's a couple of wagons. And with such a large crowd, I would anticipate that it was the First Monday. It might have been a fair. We do have parades definitely happening in downtown Georgetown around this time. But it's likely it would have been a First Monday.
So First Monday was when everybody came to town to conduct business. We just celebrate First Fridays and Second Saturdays in the downtown now. But back then, First Mondays was the popular day to be on the square and bring in your animals and your goods and your produce and all kinds of things to buy, sell, and trade. A lot of activity went on those First Mondays. So some of the pictures we have of the square just jam full of people and animals were probably taken on those First Mondays. Now you'll see the square really full most days of the week, but First Friday is coming up. For everybody who remembers pre-COVID First Fridays, that's coming back. So businesses might be open later on a Friday evening, so you can enjoy shopping or dining after work, and that'd be really fun. But Mondays was the key day, and this is really great to me because there are these really massive kind of fold down bits of fabric on the canopy. And so this is back before we had air conditioning. And back when that summer sun would really come in through these large plate glass windows with intensity. And so a lot of times buildings that faced the east or faced even the south in Texas would have these large roll down canvas fabric kind of shades, and they would protect the building from the afternoon sun and help prevent that heat gain and kind of that intense summer heat. And so that's something that I always enjoy in pictures, is seeing these really practical ways to deal with sunlight and heat in the winter and the summer when we didn't have air conditioning and we didn't have insulated buildings. And then on the right, so eventually the building became a 5 and dime store, but you can see still this corner feature is called an Oriole window. It's a rounded window that is curved glass in the window. That would have been a special order. That would have been a very expensive piece for MB Locket to install in the building, but it really gives the building a lot of identity and character, and then that great deep awning. This is a photo that looks so much more like a painting than a photo. We know it was a photo because it's got all the stamps on it that share that with us. But either the way that it developed or the age of it, this is almost something like you would see out of a European postcard. But this is our Georgetown, our square. You can see the Austin Avenue building facades on the left, and then you can see the Locket Building on the right, with a lot of electric poles outside of it. So this is after the city got electricity. we had large electric poles strung everywhere, providing that electricity to our downtown buildings and to the homes surrounding it. But Anne found this really great photo. This is compliments of the Williamson Museum. So huge thanks to them for helping us out with photos. Huge thanks also to Special Collections at Southwestern University for assisting us with photos and research. Yeah, they are an amazing partner and resource for us, and they have done an amazing job celebrating Preservation Month. So if you don't follow them on social media, Special Collections at Southwestern University posts some really interesting historic artifacts. They have a beautiful protected collection, including a lot of photographs, but also some other interesting pieces. And we've shared that they have Belford's work trunk in their collection, which is really special. So these photos come from around 1934, and we can see not super clearly, this is kind of an ongoing disappointment for me. The front of the building is really blurry. The back of the building is pretty clear. So we get a great view of the back of the building. If you go look at it today, not very different. What's kind of fun with this aerial view is that you get to see the roof. The roof on this building was not flat. It was what's called gabled. And so the rainwater would have kind of sloped down to the sides and then traveled to the downspouts, which were on the back of the building. And so not all buildings that have, it's called a parapet wall around the top, almost like a little low wall to shield the roof from view. Not all parapet walls are hiding a flat roof. Sometimes they're hiding a sloped roof. So it just depended on how they wanted to construct the building. But we have this 1939 photo that was taken by the Texas Department of Transportation when they were doing some work ahead of right-of-way and bridge improvements in Georgetown. Sometimes they were doing surveys, and so we managed to grab this photo showing the Locket Building, still keeping the appearance that we really well recognize. The big difference between the building back then and the building today is that really large flat canopy out front. And so by the time we got to around mid-1970s, some of the building pieces had deteriorated, and they had chosen to board up windows rather than replacing or repairing the material that had been deteriorated. This was really common in the mid-20th century, not only in Georgetown, but across Texas. And so this was a point in time, you know, we've shown this building was built much earlier than 1896. But if you go from 1896 to 1876, you've got 80 years of building. And just like you probably couldn't go to 80 years old without some maintenance, our buildings really can't get to 80 without some maintenance and probably some repair work. Not all building parts are meant to last forever, especially wood. It's got to be kept painted in order for it to be protected. Otherwise, moisture gets in and can deteriorate the wood over time. Metal elements might rust over time and lose some of their strength. And so buildings end up changing over time according to not only stylistic preferences, but also the durability of the materials. One of the reasons that we enjoy so many beautiful historic buildings in our downtown today is they were built with really high quality materials and they were built to last. And so when you get into a project that rehabilitates a historic structure, that becomes a really important part of the process, is making those key repairs so that the building can come with us for another 80 to 100 years. And that's exactly what happened here. So the building still looked really great in 1976, but you can see that that oriel window had been removed. I suspect that's because some of the structure supporting that window, it would have been very heavy. So some of the structure supporting that window had probably deteriorated to the point that they decided to just go ahead and remove it, close it up, and then put kind of a decorative finish piece on the bottom. But thankfully it came back. You can see at the time the front door was not in the corner. The front door was over on the right-hand side. It was a double aluminum door. So even that whole ground floor storefront had been replaced by that time. What was really wonderful, though, is this building had a lot of love and care. And so by the time it had reached the 1980s, it really got to a point, like a lot of our buildings did, where it needed a substantial amount of work. And so a lot of choices were made due to the support of the Main Street program and our community recognizing the importance of historic preservation, that buildings in the downtown needed a lot of love, but they also needed pretty significant investments to restore them. And so the oriel window was put back in. Rather than put the big flat canopy back, they chose to put these kind of slope fabric awnings. And that's also a choice that's supported by the Texas Historical Commission when having the original canopy or canopies is not a great option, at least at that time. And so there are some alternatives that are available. This is a recorded Texas historic landmark. And so what's important about this is that we have almost 40 of them in Georgetown. Most of them are residential structures. So we have some commercial structures in the down that are RTHLs, but a lot of them are people's homes. And when those are designated as recorded Texas historic landmarks, that puts state protections on the property. So not only do you have to go through the review process with the city of Georgetown to make exterior changes, you also have to go through a review process with the Texas Historical Commission. And so when those buildings are recorded, they're recorded in perpetuity, which means they have these ongoing protections no matter who the owner is. So it's not something that individual owners opt in and out of. It's something that's established by the owner of the time, and then that is conveyed with the property. So a lot of our recorded Texas historic landmarks were landmarked in the 1980s as we were doing all of this really important historic preservation work to provide protections, but to also share the stories and capture the history of these buildings. And so this has a marker on the Austin Avenue side. If you saw mine and Ann's really goofy but very enthusiastic photos promoting Preservation Month, that's the marker that we were highlighting. And so it says located on the site of an 1840 store. The structure was built after the Civil War. In the 1880s, it housed the mercantile firm of Rucker and Montgomery. You saw the Montgomery painted on the building side. Ohio native Melville Beveridge Locket, that is quite a name, opened his store here in 1889 and remodeled the building to its present Victorian design in 1896. And then it talks about some of the prominent architectural features. So this is really quite a treasure for us and has remained so. You can see that the buildings next door to it also got a lot of love and attention, beautiful new paint colors. You start to see fabric awnings come in replacing the flat canopies in the 1980s. And again, that's something kind of a stylistic preference, but also something that is a good option if you're not going to put the original canopy back, maybe because it's a very heavy structure or because it doesn't necessarily work as well with the building used today. So a lot of people remember this building with those fabric awnings on it. And then just a beautiful, beautiful job to restore the building and bring back those big windows, bring back the front door on the corner and those great storefronts. But Ann, you showed me this really shocking photo and I think I gasped out loud when I saw this. What happened to this building?
So what happened was, even after that beautiful restoration, we had an almost devastating fire in 1998. So it almost completely destroyed the Locket Building, you can see, but fortunately they were able to put it out and gain control of it. And then they were able to restore it afterwards. So it's actually undergone several restorations, including the one it currently is. Some by choice and some not. So yes, this was just about 23 years ago that they had this horrible fire, and this particular fire actually prompted some of the changes on the square and fire suppression systems within the Main Street program, and the Main Street program supporting that, so that we don't lose more of our buildings.
Right. There were some pretty spectacular fires throughout earlier history in Texas downtowns and across the U.S. So all of these wood building parts are flammable. The stone, much easier, but you generally have wood on the interior of a building or other materials or fabrics that might be flammable. And so it is really important to protect these buildings because as much as this building has undergone a lot of restoration work, that work is very costly. And so we want to make sure that we do our best to support the people who own these buildings and take great care of them, but also that we have the ability to put out fires as quickly as possible. Yes. So one of the most recent downtown fires was in downtown Waxahachie. That was several years ago, but that was an example of these buildings still have some safety concerns that need to be addressed and looked after. And so we don't want to be overly alarmed at this, but we also do want to recognize that historic buildings are precious and protecting them means more than just a new coat of paint. Sometimes it means fire suppression systems or other things that can have a lot of upfront costs, but are worth it in the long run. So many of our downtown building owners have made that investment. We're really grateful for that and want to continue to support their great stewardship of our historic places. But this is really fun. We don't always get to see the inside of buildings, but you had some photos for us, Anne, that come from the Main Street program and showing that the door moved, it looks like.
Yes, so we saw that, you pointed that out a little bit earlier, that it did move. It was originally on the corner. And then for a while, in particular in the 70s, it moved over to be more on the 8th Street side. And as we know it now, it has moved back. So it was one during the 80s restoration that it actually moved back to being a corner entrance, which is just interesting to me too, because as you were looking at the awnings, you could see when it's on the corner, when the entrance is on the corner, the awnings tend to extend further, the overhangs tend to extend further to make sure that that door gets, fully blocked. Whereas when it was on 8th Street, the awnings don't go out as far.
Right. Yeah, that's a good point. So it is really good to have entrance doors covered to protect them from the weather and the elements. Water is not a best friend of buildings at all. And so anything that you can do to prevent doors and windows from being constantly bombarded by the heavy rains that we can get in the month of May in Texas, that's always good. And you see, again, these really practical solutions for dealing with the weather and dealing with natural elements that we've had to deal with this whole time and still deal with today. This building is really beautiful. It's part of a collection of really beautiful buildings with these very decorative storefronts. These are a lot of name buildings on our north side of the square. And so you see the Locket Building, but also the H.C. Craig Building. You see the H. Gold Building, and all of these have really wonderful histories. And just some of the paintwork on the north side of the square is some of the most beautiful in highlighting those cast iron architectural details and the pressed tin cornices. So all of the bits at the top that separate the building from the sky are particularly beautiful along here. This is going to have a new business in it. The building is currently under some rehabilitation work. Because that facade is 125 years old, some of the brick had some cracks in it. Some of the mortar or kind of the cement glue for the bricks needed some repair work. So they are undergoing that process right now. And we're really excited to see the finished project. There's also going to be a little bit of a paint color change. So when they're fully finished, you'll see some bright, beautiful new paint colors on the facade and should be opening with a new restaurant later this year. But that is not our only building celebrating a milestone birthday. So the PH Dimmit Building, which I'm not sure that that's the right name for that building, but the PH Dimmit Building is another one celebrating 120 years. It was constructed in 1901. This has a really interesting history. Y'all have probably heard us talk about Lily before. Lilburn, I'll have to read it off the slide. She was married 3 separate times, survived 3 husbands, was a very notable woman in Georgetown, but this property started with her father. This is just a great photo of the square that happens to have the building in it. This is kind of the east side of the square faces west. And so where I was talking about the rolled up canvas shades, this is where all of those existed. So before air conditioning, before we had much more than maybe an electric fan to plug in, this is how our downtown merchants and business owners helped their buildings not get so hot in the summertime, was by rolling these up and down. So it'd be so funny today to kind of go through this canvas curtain on the sidewalk, but that's exactly what people did. And it looks like they're probably gathered here for, and you think maybe the Fireman's Parade?
Probably the Fireman's Parade, especially because there's so many people in white. That tends to be what you would see, is the Fireman's Parade, which would have been starting just down the block from this building in what is now the Georgetown Arts Center. They're at 7th and Main. Or sorry, no, I'm on the other side. 9th, yeah. So yes, they would have a fireman's picnic in St. Gabriel Park and a parade around the square.
Oh, how fun. This is where we have some really spectacular photos, thankfully, to show everybody decked out in their finest. You can really, even though the photo is a little bit blurry, people were really well dressed for this event. And so not surprising that some photos were taken, but really great that we've been able to keep these photos. One thing that's really interesting to me is that in this photo, you can see the onion dome on the historic Masonic Lodge. Gumbo's restaurant is there now, and that's what a lot of people know it as, but that onion dome, funny enough, has changed 3 times now. And so that's the original dome. It had much more of the onion shape. It was kind of a squatter shape than it is today. That actually disappeared for a long time, about 60 years, maybe a decade or so after this photo was taken. The onion dome was removed. We don't know why. We don't know where it went, but it was gone until the 1980s when that building was also rehabilitated and kind of brought back to its glory. A new dome was installed on top. That dome was recently replaced because of some construction issues that needed to be addressed, and also some faults with the dome construction. So that's all been resolved, and we have the 3rd dome back on, but they are not perfect replicas of the original. And the reason that we know that is because of photos like this that show that very bulbous, almost more like a garlic profile. So maybe we should call it a garlic dome. But the PH Dimmit Building is there on the right. You can see the name on the building. Funny enough, that building, even though named for PH Dimmit, he did not long survive it. And so for a lot of the Dimmitt's ownership of that building, it was actually owned by his daughter, Lilburn. And so we see both Dimmit buildings kind of sitting across 8th Street from each other. Beautiful stone structure. So this is a style that's kind of a version of what's called Romanesque. Very heavy stone, usually designed in arches and then a much heavier look. And so you see much smaller windows in the stone facade. 1901 is kind of in the middle of this beautiful, elegant cast iron storefront face in downtown Georgetown. So it's interesting that the Dimmits chose this style for this building because it was a really kind of a contrast to what was popular at the time. Not that this style didn't occur across the United States, just that it was an interesting choice in the midst of everybody else getting these very slender, elegant, large window cast iron storefronts. And then you see some great signs here, the X-side with this interesting font, and then Coca-Cola being advertised way back in early times. And then I'm very curious about this Texas bakery. Anything that says Texas bakery has probably got my attention and my dollars. I'm a big fan. But we had some really kind of a lot of activity in the downtown, and you see this Austin trade excursion showing some features that we don't get to see today. So the 100-foot tall standpipe for Georgetown Water that was right next to the fire department. You can go to the little pocket park there now, right outside the art center, and see the outline of where that water tower was, but that was removed in the 60s. And from the late 1890s to the 1960s, we had a 100-foot tall water tower in our downtown, very close to this building. But what's funny is that you can see Lux Store spelled out on the awning on this building. And that Lux Store, it turns out, is associated with some interesting shenanigans of not only Southwestern students, but some Georgetown residents too. So, yes. And what do we need to know about the AAAA organization?
So I'm not really sure we need to know terribly much about that beyond one of its founders was J. Frank Dobie, who of course is a well-known Southwestern University graduate and writer of Southwest fiction. So he regularly attended the Good Luck Store. They would go hang out there quite often. We have accounts of different Southwestern kids going and hanging out there, sometimes probably drinking there. This club was formed in retaliation to the Prohibitionists. They say they're actually supporting the Prohibition League because they were going to down more of our fair share. Yeah. So they were going to try to eliminate the alcohol in Georgetown all on their own. So it's just interesting the number of people that hung out at the Dimmit Building. So J. Frank Dobie would have been one of those in the early 1910s, around that time. And that's when it's the Good Luck store. It eventually changes to another drugstore type situation. And then you have people like Lyndon Baines Johnson hanging out there and trying to make friends with people in Georgetown, trying to get support for some of his first congressional runs here because we were in his district. He, again, actually makes really good friends with some of the Southwestern faculty and staff, which is why Southwestern was actually able to get the V-12 program in World War II, which was a training program for officers. And that's actually what probably helped keep Southwestern afloat during World War II when so many small colleges went under, was that kind of connection with LBJ, who hung out in the PH Dimmit Building when it was a drugstore. You also later get another Southwestern University student, Senator John Tower, hanging out there. So it's just interesting to me that this little kind of, we might not really notice it too much today because it is real estate offices. So it's not someplace that we regularly go into as a public, but so much activity was happening there in Georgetown's past.
I feel like it was almost its own like special writer's corner where,
It
you know,
really
you would go in and
seemed
people
to
would
have
just
been.
be, you know, like strategizing about, you know, politics and global affairs and all in a little corner of downtown Georgetown.
All in the little corner of downtown Georgetown.
Well, before it was this beautiful limestone Romanesque building, it was a few wood structures that were maybe less less grand. So this is that corner of the square in 1885 and 1889. We see a meat market, a grocery, and a bakery with the stone oven on the back of the bakery. I think that's so cool. I would like a stone oven at my house so that I could bake things too. There is something, and I could not figure this out. So I don't know if you know, there's this little blue circle in front of the meat market and it's got DH on it and it's connected to this 10-inch water pipe. Is that some kind of hydrant or do we have any idea what that blue circle might be?
Don't know what that might be, but I would imagine it might be something similar like we saw of a well or some sort of access point for water, but I don't know.
If anybody knows what that DH symbol means, I'm very interested, and I've been kind of looking around the map to try to understand and couldn't quite figure out. So something connected to the water system, and I'd like to say it was some kind of very early fire hydrant, but I don't know that that's necessarily the case. So feel free to drop us a line in the chat if you know what it is or are able to explain that to us. We don't know everything, but we do like to share as much information as we do have. So we would appreciate that assist. As we go on to 1894, all of those buildings, including my stone oven at the back of the bakery, disappear. So this was a property that at one point was owned by a man named Seaman Oscar Eidman. And he was a German immigrant to Texas when he was a very little boy, I believe in 1846. And so he came kind of in the early years of Texas. His father passed away very shortly after his family arrived, leaving kind of he and his mother and his siblings to fend for themselves. They eventually made their way to New Braunfels. He kind of worked wagon delivery and freight hauling across Texas. He did a lot of different things and acquired quite a fortune for himself 3 different times in his life. He came to Georgetown because he was looking to get away from the Texas coast, where he was living with his wife and I believe their children. And apparently everybody had gotten really sick for a while. There were a lot of kind of insect-borne illnesses that were happening. We had yellow fever in Texas. We had some other things. And so he traveled around looking for a place that would be healthy for his family. And the minute he saw Georgetown, he was sold. This is where he knew they had to be. So he brought his wife and children up here and started buying property in Georgetown. So he owned this block for a period of time and operated businesses off of this. For a very short time, we see between 1894 and 1900, somebody had developed a printing shop on this property. The gray lines around the yellow mean it was a wood building that was ironclad, and so it would have had a metal facade for some reason, either decorative or just practical. And so I thought that was so interesting that we see this very short-lived printing shop right before it's replaced in 1901 by this very large stone building. And so that stone building was the home of a few different things. Now, I have heard that this building was originally intended to be a hotel, and I have heard that it has also been a car dealership, and I have heard lots of other interesting, cool things. What I can share is that the Sanborn maps show it to be dry goods, clothing, a millinery, place to buy a hat, and then also some offices toward the back. And so unfortunately, P.H. Dimmit did not live very long after his building was complete. He passed away in 1903, leaving his very large holdings to his only daughter, Lilburn. Her mother had passed away prior to that after the birth of her baby sister. And so she was left an orphan in the care of her uncle, F.W. Carruthers. And so it turns out it was actually a very young woman who owned this building in 1905. Although I believe she was still under her uncle's guardianship at that point in time. And then in 1910, we see a lot of the same uses, some offices, a hallway to get to those offices. Looks like the offices have kind of changed shape a little bit. There was a tailor put in there, but still kind of the clothing, dry goods, and the millinery or hat maker there on the side. And then
I do have an update for you. DH is double hydrant, double fire hydrant.
Double fire. Thank you so much for that information. I'm trying to sit in there and think of like, what could it DH, and thinking it was some kind of hydrant. So thank you so much, Ms. Guerrero, for that information. That's really great. We've also, I see Mr. Paxson has let us know that Perry Brothers was also based in Lufkin until almost 2000. And so a company that we have some of our viewers familiar with, and that's so fun to see all the connections and how sharing those stories can kind of help complete the puzzle. I am a little bit puzzled, and we went from this really glamorous building facade, you know, very expensive building to construct. And then I see in 1916, we are using it for oats storage. Mm-hmm. That seems just not fancy enough for this building. And so why
there's a lot of that about the square.
I mean, I get so confused because I think, oh, this is a beautiful building facade. It's a brand new building. You know, clearly it was meant to convey, you know, prosperity, and the architect very carefully designed this, or the contractor very carefully designed this and constructed it. And then we're using one of the most, you know, iconic building facades on the square, and behind it are sacks of oats.
Yes. One of the most confused I've ever been is actually, it's the Dimmit across the street was a chicken hatchery for a while. So they are the buildings we had, and we made use of them for what we needed as a society.
Well, in Georgetown, so if you're new to Georgetown, Anna's not new to Georgetown. I'm not very new to Georgetown, but if you're new to Georgetown, we are closely approaching kind of a larger city status. So many people are moving here and really enjoying our community. So it's a little bit hard to remember today how agriculture-based Georgetown has been for most of its history. It's only been in the last decade or so that we've made a real transition to a much more urban place. But before that, and if you kind of go back through these old aerial photos, you see Georgetown was very small and the agricultural land was very large, ranching, crop production. And so a lot of our beautiful downtown buildings were used not just for very refined things, although they were, but they were also used for very practical agricultural implements, storage, you know, products, etc. And so that's just always fun to me when we see, oh, this didn't quite match up. But the oats didn't last forever. By 1925, this was a drugstore, and it looks like that continued into the 1940s. And that is something that I do have a little bit of a photo of. Sometimes you have to see things in the corners and edges of photos. But we'll go back to Lily, because she is one of my favorite female real estate developers that we talk about. So this was Lilburn, Angeline, Dimmit, Atkinson, Eubank, Douglas. And she was the daughter of Philip Dimmit and Amanda Shell. So if you've heard of Shell Road, there's a very long-standing Shell family here in Georgetown. So she comes from the Shell family. Her mother died in 1893, giving birth to her baby sister. or shortly thereafter. And so leaving Philip Dimmit as a widower and Lily just with a single parent. And then he passed away 10 years later in 1903. And so Lily did live for a very long time. She lived to be almost 100 years old. She was a businesswoman from the beginning and continued that throughout her life. And so she married first to Charles Byron Atkinson in 1909. But she, unfortunately, their marriage didn't last a great long time because of illness. And so we're not exactly sure what the nature of the illness was. It was very possibly the Spanish flu because her husband died in San Antonio in an attempt to recover from an illness. She was still in San Antonio during his burial, apparently, and had quite some time trying to recover around 1920. But she did, and then remarried. She married Rex Eubank. The Eubank family owned a lot of property and were a prominent family in Georgetown. And so she married into the Eubank family. That was her longest marriage, lasting almost 30 years, it looks like. And then her third husband, she also survived. That was David Fulton Douglas. And so despite kind of a lot of personal tragedy that she had experienced, she was very successful and definitely on top of her game in business. And so this is one of my favorite Lily stories. And this comes from the Williamson County Clerk's record. So this is something that I'm going to read out of the document. What had happened was that she owned the PH Dimmit Building. And if you are familiar with Razzmatazz Salon, they're the next door neighbor. That building was built in the 1920s. And the Rays built it to construct a soda fountain and a beauty salon upstairs. So what's so fun, if anybody has been in Georgetown for a long time, you might remember Karen's Courthouse Creamery, which was a cafe on the first floor of that building. And then today it's a hair salon. And so some of these historic uses are still with us and have continued, and that's pretty fun. But when the Rays wanted to put in this soda fountain, they eventually wanted to put in an ice cream shop, part of it that had this like big freezer component. And apparently that was really concerning to Lily, so much so that they all signed an agreement about what would happen if things went wrong. And so basically, if anything was going to happen to the wall between the buildings that they shared, the Rays were going to have to pay Lily $500 in damages. And then also it says that as a further consideration for the conveyance herein, basically letting you share this wall between our buildings, it is agreed that the parties of the second part, the Rays, may build their freezing room against the south wall of the first parties, Lily's. This starts to read a little bit like a Marx Brothers scene. To begin at a point west from the window in the wall that opens into the hall of the building belonging to the party of the first part. So being very specific about where the Rays were allowed to construct their building, what parts of the wall that they were allowed to use. There was supposed to be a hallway running north and south. And then that hall window was going to be the second window in the said wall from the west. And so like very specific in the layout of these buildings. Then it says, that said, freezing room wall shall extend no further than 3 feet and 2 inches west from the east margin of the opening that enters into the building now occupied by the alcove. Lily made them agree to within feet and inches where their freezer was going to be placed. And then it continues that the said freezing room shall be so built that it will not cover any of the openings in the wall of Lily's building, other than the first downstairs window and the east portion of the said opening in the building now occupied by the alcove, which said opening shall be filled at the expense of the parties of the second part, with brick, stone, or concrete. Said freezing room shall be so constructed that it will not drain or turn water on or against the wall or the foundation thereof, and it shall be of such material and so constructed that it will not increase the fire hazard of the parties of the first part. Basically, if you're going to build this freezer, you can only put it here. It cannot be leaking on my building or causing water damage. It can't be blocking any of the windows or openings other than what I've described, because when the Dimmit Building was constructed, it didn't have a building next door. And so it would have had windows probably on all sides of it and probably some doors on all sides of it. So when the Rays put their building next to it, it was starting to block some of what the Dimmit Building had enjoyed for probably 25 years or so at that point. And so then if there's any damage, they've got to pay for it. And then, you know, basically Lily said, if you want to add on to your building at any point in time, then it's got to be a certain way also. And so this is a woman who was really clear on not only the building that she owned, but how to take care of it. And so much so that she was ensuring by a contract agreement that she was going to be compensated if anything were to go amiss with that freezer. And if you remember, you know, in the 1920s, freezer technology was still very new. Downtown had only had electricity at this point, I think, since about 1908. And so this was kind of some new technology being introduced for this very popular soda fountain that was popular with Southwestern students. And we don't have really great photos of it from the 1934 aerials, but you can see it just a little bit. So basically enough to know that the building was there and it did have large canopies. We do have just the edge of that drugstore sign. It was a Walgreens. So up in the top right corner of this photo, this is a photo of the Centennial Parade for Georgetown. And so you had a lot of floats and a lot of participants from all over the state of Texas in this really huge parade. But we just get to see, it looks like the sign might have said cool drugs, but it probably said something a little more practical.
Cooper's.
Cooper's Drugs.
Yeah,
that was a Walgreens. Thank you. I was afraid it said cool drugs and gave a misrepresentation.
And that's where LBJ would have been hanging out.
At the cool drugstore. Definitely J. Frank Dobie was at the cool drugstore. So this is also a recorded Texas historic landmark, and the marker on this building, if you want to stop by and see it for yourself, it's right there on the front, but it says associated with Texas pioneers, businessmen, statesmen, writers, erected 1901 as a hotel by P.H. Dimmit and Company, later occupied by mercantile stores, meeting place for families and friends from Williamson County communities, Georgetown's first movie house, then auto agency, later a drugstore, dental office, bus depot, remodeled 1960 by Georgetown Savings and Loan Association, preserving Spanish arches, brick columns, and turrets of native stone, and that would be limestone. And
I
so
forgot.
this is,
Sorry, go ahead. I forgot about that. In the account of it actually being a movie house, they actually put the screen at the front of the building and then sloped the floors going back towards the back. So you would actually have to walk in past the screen
oh, how
to
funny.
go sit down and enjoy your movie.
So here are a few more photos from the 1970s. This is back before we had some really gorgeous trees downtown to block the view. This is down the side of the building. So it almost had two facades. It had the front facade on Main Street and then another facade facing East 8th Street. So the dark coloring that you see on the stone, a lot of people think is dirt. It's not dirt. It's actually what happens when water gets trapped into masonry. And so it creates these little colonies of microorganisms that create this dark color. So a lot of people think, oh, I want to pressure wash my building and spray all this dirt off. That's the opposite of what you want to do, because introducing that water at high pressure can damage the stone, and it also forces water into the stone, and it will just make a darker color. So if you do have some concerns about a building darkening over time, know that this is pretty natural and pretty typical, but also there are some solutions for that that would be much more successful than others. So don't power wash or sandblast a historic building. It'll probably damage the materials and then you'll be in a bad situation. But these are, again, some really great photos. And then today it's a little bit hard to see because of the beautiful trees, but we do enjoy the shade and benefit a lot from that. So we're a little bit over our time because we had so many slides today, but we do appreciate y'all joining us again for our Tuesday Talks Preservation Month episode. If you need to contact us, if you have information to share, please email us at historic@georgetown.org. You can call me at 512-930-3581, or you can call Ann at 512-930-6614. We will have a recording of this Tuesday Talks posted probably by tomorrow. So if anybody missed it and they want to see it, or if you want to recap, you can do that. And then we will be back next week, June 1st, to do another show. And we're really looking forward to that. So, Ann, thank you as always for joining me. Thanks for celebrating building birthday parties all month. I cannot wait to hear more of your stories next week. I always love hearing your stories, but I think that'll be particularly fun next week when we share some things we haven't gotten to talk about before.
Absolutely. Thank you, Britin.
All right, well, y'all take care. Enjoy the rest of your Preservation Month. Please be sure to check out our partners and head downtown to check out the beautiful buildings that we have and are still enjoying 125 years later.